Imagine standing at the edge of a vast desert, the morning sun casting golden light over rolling dunes. In the distance, a caravan of camels slowly moves along a winding path, their silhouettes dancing in the heat haze. This is the beginning of a journey unlike any other journey through time, across continents, and into the heart of human history. Welcome to the Silk Road, a sprawling network of trade routes that connected the great civilizations of China to the Mediterranean, a route that for over 1,500 years facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture on a scale that shaped the world as we know it today. From the delicate threads of Chinese silk that adorned Roman nobility, to the rich spices that transformed cuisines from Persia to Italy, the Silk Road was more than a trade route. It was a lifeline of interaction, innovation, and human ambition. Merchants, scholars, and travelers from diverse lands traversed mountains, deserts, and rivers, carrying not only precious commodities but also philosophies, religions, and stories that would ripple through generations. Every step along these paths was a step into a world where cultures collided, blended, and inspired one another, leaving behind legacies still felt in art, literature, and architecture today. Yet, behind the glittering facade of silk and gold lay a far darker and often overlooked reality. The wealth and luxury that many enjoyed were built upon the labor and suffering of countless people who were captured, traded, and transported across vast distances, their lives entwined with the relentless demand for goods and the ambitions of empires. These were the forgotten travelers of the Silk Road, whose stories of resilience, endurance, and human spirit have too often been buried beneath the grandeur of historical trade. In this video, we will uncover both the celebrated and shadowed aspects of the Silk Road. We will explore the lives of the people who traversed its treacherous paths, the bustling markets that buzzed with activity, and the cultural crossroads that gave rise to some of the most extraordinary exchanges in history. Through their stories, you will see how human courage, ingenuity, and sometimes tragedy shaped a route that was as much about human connection as it was about commerce. Before we journey deeper into this fascinating tale, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel to stay tuned for more insightful stories from the past. By supporting us, you help bring these hidden chapters of history to light, ensuring that the voices of those who lived, struggled, and persevered along the Silk Road are remembered. Get ready to embark on a voyage through deserts, mountains, and ancient cities. The Silk Road awaits, carrying with it stories of wealth, culture, and the enduring human spirit that have shaped the course of history for over a millennium. As the sun rose higher over the endless stretches of sand and stone, the caravans on the Silk Road began their slow, deliberate march, laden with treasures that would soon spark wonder in lands far beyond their origin. Among the most coveted of these treasures was silk, spun with painstaking care in the workshops of China, its threads shimmering like liquid gold under the morning light. This fabric was more than a commodity. It was a symbol of status, beauty, and sophistication, coveted by emperors, nobles, and merchants alike, its value often surpassing that of precious metals. The journey of each bolt of silk was itself an epic, traversing treacherous deserts, scaling rugged mountains, and navigating turbulent rivers, carried by travelers who risked banditry, starvation, and exhaustion to deliver these delicate treasures to distant markets. Alongside silk flowed a river of spices, each one carrying the essence of distant lands, with scents and flavors that could transform the simplest meal into a feast fit for royalty. Cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from the Maluku Islands, cardamom from the Indian subcontinent, and pepper from tropical plantations made their way along the Silk Road, infusing kitchens from Persia to Rome with exotic aromas and tastes that few had ever imagined. These spices were not merely culinary delights. They were instruments of diplomacy and power, capable of opening doors, forging alliances, and enriching the coffers of merchants and rulers who understood their worth. They traveled alongside tea, a humble leaf that would come to define entire cultures, steeped in rituals of hospitality and contemplation. Tea, with its soothing warmth and subtle flavor, carried stories from the Chinese countryside to the grand halls of foreign courts, a reminder of distant fields, laborers' hands, and centuries of careful cultivation. Porcelain, delicate and luminous, traversed these same routes, each piece a testament to craftsmanship and artistry, its fragile curves often encased in layers of protective packaging, carried over sand and stone as if it were a treasure too precious for the world to witness its fragility. From the kilns of Jingdezhen to the bustling bazaars of Central Asia, porcelain not only served as a functional object but also became a canvas for stories, adorned with motifs that captured the imagination of those who glimpsed its intricate beauty. Jade, revered for its deep green glow and mystical significance, moved silently alongside these commodities, sought after for its spiritual resonance and as a marker of social distinction. It was traded for gold, silver, and even lives, its value extending beyond the tangible into the realm of symbolism, bridging cultural gaps and connecting civilizations through a shared reverence for beauty and rarity. Glassware, often imported from the Mediterranean, found its way eastward. Delicate vessels and beads that added color and brilliance to markets already alive with the pulse of commerce. A reminder that the Silk Road was not a one-way street but a conduit for mutual fascination and exchange. Horses, strong and swift, carried not only merchants and their wares but also the dreams and ambitions of empires, prized for their speed, endurance, and the advantage they provided in both trade and warfare. The sight of these animals, their muscles rippling under the sun, and their hooves raising clouds of dust, became a familiar image to travelers who understood that survival on the Silk Road depended as much on mobility as it did on goods and alliances. Every item that moved along these ancient paths told a story of labor, negotiation, and cultural interplay. A bolt of silk carried with it the sweat of artisans who had mastered their craft through years of dedication, the hum of looms echoing in quiet workshops, the rhythm of hands weaving patterns that reflected centuries of tradition. A jar of spices carried with it the scent of distant forests and plantations, the labor of countless hands, and the imagination of cooks who would turn humble ingredients into culinary marvels. Porcelain, jade, and glassware were not just objects. They were vessels of identity, faith, and prestige, encapsulating the aesthetics, beliefs, and aspirations of the societies that produced them. The journey of these goods was never simple. Merchants formed caravans for protection, relying on the strength of their numbers to fend off thieves and the unpredictability of nature. They navigated deserts where the sun scorched their skin and nights where temperatures plummeted, where water was scarce and survival uncertain. Yet, for every risk, there was reward, a market bustling with eager buyers, a foreign court impressed by the novelty and luxury of distant lands, a transaction that could elevate a merchant from modest means to opulent wealth. Alongside material wealth, there was an exchange of knowledge, philosophy, and art. For every interaction along the route was an opportunity to share stories, observe customs, and leave traces of one's own culture in another. And as these commodities traveled, they bridged civilizations, connecting people who might otherwise never have crossed paths. They created networks of interdependence, shared understanding, and cultural enrichment. A piece of jade in a Persian palace, a bolt of silk on a Roman emperor's shoulders, a cup of Chinese tea in a Baghdad market, all these objects carried the essence of distant lands, serving as tangible reminders of humanity's capacity for curiosity, ambition, and creativity. They remind us that the Silk Road was more than a path for trade. It was a living artery of civilization, where wealth, culture, and human ingenuity flowed freely, shaping the course of history in ways that continue to resonate even today. Through these journeys, we witness how the pursuit of goods was inseparable from the pursuit of knowledge, culture, and connection, illustrating that the Silk Road was not merely a commercial network but a mirror reflecting the complexities, aspirations, and shared humanity of those who walked its winding paths. The journey along the Silk Road was never a simple passage from one city to another, nor was it merely a procession of merchants carrying silk, spices, porcelain, and precious stones. It was a test of endurance, courage, and strategy, where every step could spell fortune or disaster. As caravans snaked their way across deserts shimmering under the relentless sun, the travelers were constantly reminded that the land itself was as formidable an adversary as any human threat. The vast expanses of sand stretched endlessly, hiding shifting dunes that could swallow a camel and its load in an instant, while the nights brought sudden chills, turning the desert into a frozen expanse where frost could bite through layers of clothing, leaving even the hardiest traveler trembling under the stars. Mountains rose like jagged guardians along the road, their sheer faces demanding skill, patience, and sometimes sheer luck to scale, with narrow passes where a single misstep could send lives tumbling into the depths below. Rivers and streams, vital for water and sustenance, were unpredictable, swollen by seasonal rains or blocked by rocky terrain. They presented dangers that required constant vigilance and the careful guidance of experienced leaders who knew where to ford and where to detour, often relying on knowledge passed down through generations of traders and guides. But it was not only nature that posed a threat along the Silk Road. Bandits and raiders, aware of the wealth flowing across these ancient arteries, lurked in the shadows, ready to seize goods and, sometimes, lives. The whispers of theft, ambush, and betrayal traveled faster than the caravans themselves, instilling a sense of unease in even the most seasoned merchants. Rumors of a group of thieves waiting beyond a mountain pass or of nomadic raiders descending upon a remote outpost forced caravans to plan meticulously, coordinating travel times and routes with care, often joining with other merchants to form larger, more intimidating groups that could deter attackers through sheer numbers. Every night in a remote oasis or along a riverbank was a calculated risk. Campfires flickered not only as beacons of warmth and light, but also as signals of human presence to ward off those who might seek to exploit the travelers' vulnerability. Guards patrolled tirelessly. Camels were trained to react to sounds, and goods were meticulously arranged for quick defense. A choreography of survival hung over centuries of hardship along these merciless roads. The composition of the caravan itself was an art of survival, blending commerce with vigilance. Merchants traveled with pack animals, their burdens carefully balanced and protected, while scouts rode ahead to survey the path for danger, returning with vital information about the terrain and any potential threats. Guides familiar with local customs, languages, and landscapes became indispensable, serving as both interpreters and negotiators, ensuring that the group could pass safely through territories controlled by different kingdoms. Tribal communities, or nomadic clans. Along the way, the caravan would encounter other travelers, scholars, pilgrims, and fellow merchants whose shared knowledge and experience often proved as valuable as the goods they carried. Campsites became temporary communities, where alliances were formed, stories exchanged, and strategies discussed to navigate the perils that lay ahead. Each member of the caravan, from the youngest assistant to the most experienced trader, played a role in the collective safety, understanding that the loss of vigilance by even one individual could jeopardize the entire group. Despite these precautions, danger was never entirely avoidable. Sandstorms could arise with little warning, turning familiar landscapes into blinding maelstroms where camels stampeded and goods were buried beneath shifting dunes. Sudden attacks by bandits or raiders could scatter the caravan, forcing merchants to negotiate, bribe. In the worst cases, fight for their lives and the survival of their precious cargo. The landscape itself, mountains, deserts, rivers demanded constant adaptation, requiring travelers to anticipate weather, plan for scarcity of food and water, and maintain the health and strength of their animals. For a weakened camel or horse could mean disaster not just for the cargo but for the lives of all who depended on it. The very act of traveling along the Silk Road was a dance with uncertainty, a negotiation with both nature and humanity, where skill, knowledge, and resilience determined whether one would reach the next market alive and intact. Yet, it was precisely these challenges that forged the character of those who journeyed along the Silk Road. The merchants, guides, and laborers who braved deserts and mountains, who faced the threat of ambushes and the unpredictability of the elements, became more than traders. They were custodians of culture, knowledge, and connection. Their perseverance ensured that silk from China could drape Roman nobility, that spices could transform European cuisine, and that porcelain, jade, and glassware could travel thousands of miles to enrich distant lands. Each journey carried lessons in strategy, patience, and human cooperation, as well as the stark reminder that wealth and cultural exchange came at the cost of enduring relentless challenges, both seen and unseen. Through this perilous landscape, the Silk Road emerged not merely as a route for commerce, but as a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and the unwavering desire to connect worlds separated by vast and often hostile terrain. Every caravan that made its way safely to the next city left behind a legacy of courage and determination, reminding us that the treasures of the Silk Road, its silks, spices, and stories were inseparable from the trials endured to transport them, and that the survival and success of these travelers were as integral to the history of the Silk Road as the goods they carried. Beneath the glittering surface of the Silk Road, where silk shimmered in the sun and spices perfumed bustling marketplaces, there existed a far darker and often overlooked reality that shaped the very foundations of trade along these ancient routes: the presence of slavery, a practice as old as commerce itself and a human story intertwined with ambition, desperation, and survival. Long before the infamous transatlantic slave trade transformed the world in the modern era, slavery had been a constant companion to trade in Asia, Africa, and Europe, embedded deeply into the economic and social structures of countless civilizations. Individuals from every corner of the known world, Africans from the deserts and rivers of the continent, Europeans from the highlands and coastal towns of the West, and Asians from regions spanning Central Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Far East found themselves ensnared in systems that treated human life as a commodity, their fates bound to the movements of empires, merchants, and the relentless demand for labor. The origins of these enslaved individuals were varied, reflecting the complexities of human society in a pre-industrial world. Many were captured during wars, their defeats sealing their lives into chains that would carry them thousands of miles from home. Armies advancing across plains, sieges on cities, and skirmishes between neighboring kingdoms created opportunities for the victors to claim not only land and resources, but also people, their labor viewed as an extension of conquest and control. Raids by nomadic groups or opportunistic brigands also contributed to the flow of human lives into captivity, exploiting moments of vulnerability and disorder, and creating a network of displacement that mirrored the vast trade routes themselves. In some cases, families in desperate circumstances, facing famine, debt, or economic ruin, made the unimaginable choice to sell a child or relative, a decision born not of cruelty but of survival, reflecting the harsh realities that dictated life for many across continents. Once captured, the journey of these individuals was both grueling and perilous, their existence reduced to the movement of goods across mountains, deserts, and rivers, echoing the very routes along which silk and spices traveled. Chains clinked with every step as slaves were herded into caravans, transported by pack animals, or loaded onto boats bound for distant ports, their bodies fatigued and spirits tested by exhaustion, hunger, and fear. The traders who managed these human cargoes were often meticulous in their methods, cataloging the skills, physical condition, and even perceived temperament of those they sold, ensuring that buyers received what they considered a reliable investment. In markets stretching from the Mediterranean to the Far East, the presence of enslaved people was both normalized and commercialized, a grim reminder that the pursuit of wealth and the facilitation of cultural exchange often relied on human suffering. Despite the horrors, the experiences of enslaved individuals were not monolithic, and some managed to navigate their circumstances with resilience and agency, carving small spaces of influence or survival within oppressive systems. Accounts of those who became intermediaries, artisans, or domestic workers reveal a complex tapestry of human ingenuity, where skill, adaptability, and fortitude allowed individuals to endure, in races, rise above their imposed station. Yet even these stories of relative agency could not erase the brutality inherent in a system that commodified human beings, separating them from families, communities, and the cultural contexts that had previously defined their lives. The psychological toll of such separation, combined with the physical demands of labor across hostile landscapes, ensured that the experience of slavery on the Silk Road remained an enduring shadow over the otherwise vibrant narratives of trade and cultural exchange. Empires, from the Han Dynasty in China to the Byzantine rulers of the Mediterranean, and later the Mongol and Ottoman powers, institutionalized and profited from these practices, integrating slavery into their economic models and military strategies. Slaves served in domestic households, laboring in agricultural fields, or in specialized roles within courts, reflecting the diverse applications of their skills and the adaptability of the system to the needs of those who wielded power. In Central Asia, the Turfan Basin and other Oasis cities became critical hubs where transactions of human lives were conducted alongside commodities like silk, jade, and spices, each slave contract meticulously recorded. Their origins, age, and abilities noted, a chilling testament to the bureaucratic precision that accompanied human exploitation. Yet, even amid this grim reality, the interconnectedness of the Silk Road meant that cultures collided in unexpected ways. Enslaved people, despite their constrained circumstances, became carriers of knowledge, language, and skills, inadvertently facilitating exchanges that would influence art, architecture, and even governance in distant lands. The tragic irony of their existence was that while they were forced into movement and labor for the enrichment of others, their presence along these routes contributed to the very cultural tapestry that made the Silk Road historically remarkable. They were witnesses, participants, and often unsung architects of a network that bridged continents, and their stories, when uncovered, reveal the human cost behind the glittering commodities and celebrated achievements of trade. In examining slavery along the Silk Road, we see that commerce, ambition, and cultural exchange were inseparable from the suffering that underpinned them. The roads that carried silk, spices, tea, and porcelain were also arteries of human displacement, threading together continents with the footsteps of those who endured unimaginable hardship. By understanding this dimension of history, we gain a fuller, more nuanced view of the Silk Road not merely as a conduit of wealth and ideas, but as a complex human ecosystem where power, survival, and resilience intersected in ways that continue to echo across time. These stories remind us that every treasure, every innovation, and every connection forged along these ancient paths was inseparable from the human lives that made them possible, compelling us to acknowledge both the brilliance and the sorrow that coexist in the legacy of one of history's greatest networks of trade. As the vast network of the Silk Road stretched from the bustling ports of China to the far reaches of Europe, it was not only a channel for the movement of silks, spices, porcelain, and other treasures, but also a corridor where human lives were bought, sold, and traded, leaving behind a legacy of both wealth and suffering that is often overlooked in popular histories of commerce. Major slave markets punctuated this immense route, serving as hubs of commerce where the transactions of human beings were conducted with the same rigor and precision as any other valuable commodity. In the West, Dublin stood as one of the most prominent markets, drawing captives from Ireland, Viking raids, and neighboring territories. Its docks crowded with ships carrying both goods and people destined to serve in households, farms, or armies far from their homelands. The market thrived on the convergence of raiders, traders, and opportunists, each seeking to profit from the turmoil and displacement that accompanied conflicts. And every exchange reinforced a cycle of human suffering hidden beneath the glittering allure of trade and prosperity. Moving eastward, Shandong in China became another crucial node in the network of human commerce. Here, slaves were often captured from the Korean peninsula, brought across treacherous terrain and waterways to meet the insatiable demands of Chinese elites and merchants. The bustling port cities along the coast became centers of both wealth and human exploitation, where the same meticulous attention applied to silk and porcelain was extended to people carefully recorded contracts. Evaluations of physical abilities and negotiations over price were routine, a grim reflection of the bureaucratic sophistication that accompanied ancient trade. Within the walls of these markets, the cries of the enslaved mingled with the chatter of merchants haggling over spices and textiles, a haunting reminder that the prosperity of the Silk Road was built upon both human ingenuity and human suffering. Further inland, the arid expanse of Central Asia hosted the Turfan Oasis, a critical waypoint where caravans rested, replenished their supplies, and conducted exchanges of goods and human lives alike. The Oasis, with its irrigated fields and strategic location along intersecting trade routes, became a natural center for the convergence of merchants from distant lands, offering not only shelter and sustenance but also a marketplace where captives from war, raids, and economic desperation were sold to the highest bidder. Scholars such as Susan Whitfield have documented the meticulous nature of these transactions, noting that contracts often included detailed information about the origins, skills, and ages of slaves, ensuring that buyers could assess their value as both laborers and companions. These records, sometimes preserved in tomes or official archives, provide a window into a world where human beings were catalogued with the same precision as silks, spices, and jade, their fates determined by the economic ambitions of others. The experience of enslaved individuals within these markets varied, but common threads of hardship and resilience ran through their stories. Many were forced to travel hundreds or even thousands of miles, often by caravan or ship, through deserts, mountains, and rivers, enduring extreme heat, cold, hunger, and fatigue, their bodies pressed into service before they even reached their final destinations. Those who survived these journeys were then thrust into lives of labor, domestic service, or military duty, their identities reshaped to fit the needs of their owners, while their cultural and familial connections were severed, leaving a profound sense of displacement and loss. Yet even within these oppressive systems, some enslaved people managed to navigate the social hierarchies and carve out spaces for survival, skill, or influence, their presence contributing in subtle ways to the economic, cultural, and intellectual exchanges that defined the Silk Road. The networks of these markets also reveal the transcontinental nature of the slave trade along the Silk Road, illustrating how human lives were entangled in the same webs of commerce and communication that carried goods from one end of the road to the other. A captive taken in West Africa could ultimately find themselves in a palace in China, while a child sold by a desperate family in Eastern Europe might end up laboring in the fields of Central Asia, each journey marked by peril, adaptation, and endurance. The convergence of traders, intermediaries, and local authorities ensured that the trade of human beings was not a peripheral activity, but a central component of the economic life along these routes. Intertwined with the movement of silk, tea, spices, jade, glassware, and other prized commodities. Yet, beyond the logistics and commerce, these markets also reveal the moral and human dimensions of the Silk Road. They challenge modern observers to confront the reality that the very roads celebrated for fostering cultural exchange. Philosophical discourse and the spread of technology were simultaneously conduits for human suffering. The cries, resilience, and endurance of those subjected to enslavement form an essential, though often hidden, narrative within the broader history of the Silk Road, reminding us that prosperity for some often came at an unimaginable cost to others. These major slave markets, Dublin, Shandong, and Turfanosis, stand as historical markers of both human ambition and human cruelty, offering a lens through which we can examine the complexities of commerce, culture, and morality in a world long past yet deeply connected to the present through the enduring legacies of trade, migration, and human endeavor. By understanding these hubs of human commerce alongside the movement of goods and ideas, we gain a more nuanced appreciation of the Silk Road as a multifaceted network, one that facilitated not only the wealth of empires and merchants, but also the endurance, suffering, and, at times, quiet triumphs of the enslaved individuals whose lives were inextricably bound to these ancient trade routes. Through this lens, the Silk Road emerges as a story of contrasts, beauty and brutality, ingenuity and exploitation, connection and dislocation, a testament to the complexity of human history and the enduring impact of one of the world's most remarkable networks of exchange. Life as a slave along the Silk Road was a stark, unvarnished reality that existed in sharp contrast to the glittering imagery of silks, spices, and precious stones that so often dominates our imagination of these historic trade routes. And yet, it was this very labor that underpinned the functioning of empires, markets, and elite households, weaving human toil into the fabric of commerce and culture across continents. Enslaved individuals found themselves cast into roles as varied as the empire-spanning network itself. Some toiled in agricultural fields where the rhythm of the seasons dictated relentless work from dawn until dusk, plowing, planting, and harvesting crops that fed not only the local populace but also caravans journeying across deserts and mountains, while others were thrust into domestic households where their skills in cooking, cleaning, and maintaining the comfort of their masters' homes were demanded with exacting standards and an unforgiving expectation of obedience. For those sold into military service, the stakes were life itself. Men were conscripted into armies or employed as guards, their endurance tested under harsh conditions, often forced to march great distances, bear weapons, and confront dangers from both the battlefield and the harsh environment alike, while women might be assigned to elite courts, serving in roles that ranged from attendants and entertainers to caretakers and personal aides, navigating intricate hierarchies with caution, skill, and sometimes peril. The conditions endured by these individuals were universally harsh, defined by overwork, deprivation, and vulnerability, yet the specifics varied according to the context. Climate and intentions of their owners. In agricultural settings, laborers faced grueling toil under the sun, with scant respite, poorly constructed shelters, and minimal sustenance that often left them fatigued and weakened. Their lives measured in the rhythm of planting and harvest, with little hope for rest or personal fulfillment. In elite households or courts, while the environment might have been physically safer, the psychological demands were immense. Strict hierarchies, constant scrutiny, and the threat of punishment or social marginalization created an atmosphere where obedience was enforced by fear. Subtle manipulation, or outright violence. Malnutrition was a frequent companion across these environments, as the provisioning of food was often minimal, calculated to sustain labor rather than nourish. And many suffered from illnesses that could have been easily treated under different circumstances, with death sometimes arriving swiftly from preventable causes. Beyond the immediate physical hardships, the psychological toll of slavery along these trade routes cannot be overstated. Families were torn apart, children separated from parents, and communities fragmented, leaving individuals to confront isolation and loss on a scale that compounded the daily grind of labor. Cultural dislocation was equally profound, as language, customs, and traditions of origin were often suppressed or rendered meaningless in new environments, forcing enslaved people to adapt to alien societies while retaining fragments of memory, identity, and resilience. Even when certain skills or talents provided a modicum of protection or status, an artisan, a scholar, or a person with a particular military ability might find slightly better treatment, the underlying lack of freedom remained constant, a shadow over every interaction and decision. The diverse roles of enslaved individuals also highlight the vast interconnection of the Silk Road network itself, illustrating that slavery was not merely a localized or incidental practice, but an essential component of the economic and social systems that sustained these empires and trade hubs. Agricultural laborers enabled caravans to be provisioned and markets to function. Domestic servants maintained households that served as centers of commerce and hospitality. Military slaves reinforced the security of borders, trade routes, and ruling authorities, allowing the exchange of goods and ideas to continue. Court attendants and specialized workers facilitated the cultural and political life of elite centers where wealth, power, and art converged. Across thousands of miles, the labor of enslaved people literally carried the weight of the Silk Road, ensuring that the transmission of silk, spices, jade, porcelain, glassware, and countless other commodities could reach distant markets, and that empires remained connected, functional, and prosperous. Yet, despite the universality of hardship, enslaved individuals sometimes displayed remarkable resilience, resourcefulness, and agency, finding ways to maintain identity, practice religion, preserve language, or pass down knowledge to subsequent generations. These acts of quiet endurance and subtle influence underscore the human dimension of this history, reminding us that behind every transaction, every caravan, and every market, there were stories of personal survival, adaptation, and resistance. The brevity of life for many slaves a consequence of overwork, disease, malnutrition, and abuse did not extinguish the human spirit, and even in circumstances designed to dehumanize, some individuals carved out spaces of autonomy, skill, or social connection that reverberated within the broader context of their communities. In understanding the roles, conditions, and resilience of those enslaved along the Silk Road, we gain a more nuanced comprehension of the broader historical narrative, one that intertwines commerce, culture, ambition, and human suffering It challenges the romanticized view of the Silk Road as solely a conduit of goods and ideas, revealing it instead as a complex human ecosystem where prosperity for some was built upon the toil and endurance of others, and where the daily lives, struggles, and quiet triumphs of enslaved people were integral to the very network that linked continents, empires, and civilizations. Their experiences, though often obscured by time, remain essential to understanding the true cost of the Silk Road and the profound human legacy embedded in its history, reminding us that behind the beauty of traded goods lay stories of endurance, adaptation, and survival against overwhelming odds. Throughout the sweeping expanse of Eurasia, the practice of slavery was a persistent, complex, and often overlooked facet of the civilizations that rose and fell along the Silk Road, entwining with the movement of goods, ideas, and culture in ways that reveal both the ambitions and the moral compromises of empires spanning centuries. And among the most influential of these were the Roman Empire, the Byzantine state, the Mongol Khanates, the Ottoman Empire, and the various Chinese dynasties, each developing distinct system, hierarchies, and purposes for the acquisition and management of enslaved populations, creating a mosaic of practices that mirrored the diversity of the Silk Road itself. In Rome, slaves were drawn from the far reaches of the empire, from prisoners of war, victims of piracy, and captives purchased from external traders, filling roles across agriculture, construction, domestic service, and military support, while the urban centers of the Mediterranean saw a concentration of enslaved individuals whose labor underpinned monumental engineering projects, maintained households of the elite, and reinforced the administrative and economic machinery that allowed Rome to flourish over centuries. Their lives often marked by hardship, overwork, and the constant awareness of their status as property. Yet within this system, a degree of social mobility was sometimes possible through formal manumission, which allowed some to attain limited rights, citizenship, and integration into civic life. As the Western Roman Empire transitioned to the Byzantine Empire, the institutions of slavery evolved, retaining many structural similarities while incorporating new legal frameworks. Religious influences and administrative oversight. And while the moral discourse around slavery began to emerge in Christian thought, questioning its alignment with divine and natural law, these debates seldom translated into widespread abolition, instead gradually reshaping the power dynamics between owners and enslaved, limiting certain abuses, and regulating ownership practices. Yet the system continued to provide crucial labor for agriculture, domestic work, military service, and artisanal production, sustaining both the economy and the sophisticated social hierarchy of Byzantium. With slaves acquired through warfare, trade, and local markets, their lives subjected to legal constraints, religious oversight, and social expectations that reflected the complexities of a civilization balancing expansion, defense, and internal stability. The Mongol Empire, in contrast, introduced a scale and fluidity of enslavement linked directly to the extraordinary conquests of the early 13th century, as campaigns from 1206 to 1260 resulted in an unprecedented flow of war captives, many of whom were absorbed into domestic, military, or administrative roles across the vast territories of Eurasia, valued not merely as labor but often for their specialized skills, knowledge, or ability to integrate into local networks. And despite the eventual fragmentation of the empire and cessation of its expansion, the demand for skilled and unskilled enslaved labor persisted, demonstrating how conquest and empire building created both immediate and long-lasting human consequences, embedding slavery into the economic and political structures of the region, and intertwining it inexorably with the movement of goods and ideas along the Silk Road. Within the Ottoman Empire, The system of slavery exhibited its own distinctive character, particularly in terms of gender roles, labor allocation, and hierarchical structures, where males were often channeled into military service or domestic labor, and females typically served in domestic or courtly settings, performing roles that ranged from menial tasks to highly specialized duties, such as attending to the intricate rituals of elite households, preparing food, or providing care within royal quarters. The racial hierarchies within Ottoman society further complicated the institution, with African women often assigned the most labor-intensive and low-status duties, while women of European or local origin might be placed in positions requiring greater skills. Literacy, or etiquette, demonstrating how enslavement intersected with ethnicity. Social expectations, and the operational needs of the state. This system, while harsh, also incorporated mechanisms for social mobility or temporary service, where some enslaved individuals were able to gain skills, status, or eventual freedom, revealing the nuanced and varied experiences of those bound by these structures. Chinese dynasties, including the Tang and Yuan periods, similarly engaged in the systematic use and trade of enslaved labor, acquiring individuals both domestically and via maritime and overland routes extending from East Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Central Asia, their transportation involving months of perilous travel across oceans, rivers, and deserts, where shipwrecks, disease, and malnutrition claimed the lives of many, underscoring the human cost behind the growing demand for labor. Within Chinese society, enslaved individuals served diverse roles, from agricultural laborers feeding the cities and caravans, to domestic attendants in urban households, to specialized artisans or entertainers in the courts, each role reflecting the intricate demands of a sophisticated and hierarchical civilization. And yet, despite the diversity of assignments and occasional opportunities for skill-based advancement, the fundamental reality of bondage and loss of autonomy remained a defining feature of their existence. Across these varied empires, a common thread emerges. Slavery was integrated into the political, economic, and social fabric of civilizations connected by the Silk Road, serving as both a driver and consequence of expansion, trade, and cultural exchange. Each system reflected local priorities, cultural norms, and economic imperatives, yet all were bound by the recognition of human labor as a commodity, a reality that sustained monumental construction. Agricultural production, domestic life, and military campaigns while simultaneously exacting an immense human toll. The stories of these enslaved individuals, though often obscured by the passage of time, illuminate the human cost behind the grandeur of empire, revealing how interconnected networks of trade, conquest, and cultural ambition relied upon the toil, endurance, and resilience of countless men, women, and children, whose labor underpinned the wealth and stability of civilizations from Rome to China. Understanding the distinct approaches to slavery across Roman, Byzantine, Mongol, Ottoman, and Chinese systems enriches our comprehension of the Silk Road not merely as a conduit for exotic goods and ideas, but as a human ecosystem where commerce, conquest, and coercion intertwined, revealing the deep interdependence of prosperity and human suffering, the complexity of social hierarchies, and the enduring legacies of an institution that shaped lives, societies, and the very course of history in ways that continue to resonate across continents even today. The human stories behind the Silk Road were often marked by tragedy, desperation, and complex moral dilemmas, as individuals were drawn into the institution of slavery through a variety of circumstances that reflected the economic, political, and social pressures of their time, revealing how intertwined human vulnerability and the pursuit of commerce could be come across the vast landscapes connecting East and West. Many enslaved individuals were captured during warfare, the spoils of military campaigns that spanned regions and cultures, where armies swept through cities and villages, taking prisoners who were then funneled into local markets or sent on long treks across deserts, mountains, and rivers, their fate determined by the demand for labor and the appetites of distant traders who sought human capital as much as silk, spices, or precious metals. These captives were often forced to witness the destruction of their homes, the loss of family members, and the collapse of familiar communities. Experiences that compounded the trauma of bondage and made the journey into slavery as psychologically devastating as it was physically exhausting. At the same time, the institution of slavery along the Silk Road extended into the domestic sphere, where families struggling with extreme poverty sometimes made the heartbreaking choice to sell a child or a relative in the hope of survival, relief from famine, or the repayment of debts, an act that transformed intimate, personal relationships into transactions dictated by economic necessity. These decisions, though born out of desperation rather than malice, carried long-lasting consequences, severing ties, erasing cultural continuity, and consenting loved ones to lives where autonomy was severely curtailed and daily existence was dominated by the whims of owners or traders. Even when individuals made the choice themselves, voluntarily submitting to slavery in the face of famine, harassment, or insurmountable hardship, the act was rarely liberating in the conventional sense, as freedom of choice was constrained by the immediacy of survival needs, leaving a bittersweet tension between agency and subjugation that highlights the complex human calculus behind the movement of people along these trade networks. Enslavement was not limited to any single region or people. It spanned continents and encompassed Africans, Europeans, and Asians, reflecting the cosmopolitan and interconnected nature of Silk Road commerce. African captives were transported over the Red Sea, across the Indian Ocean, or marched through the Sahara to reach Mediterranean ports, where they entered into households, agricultural estates, or military service, their journey punctuated by hardship, disease, and exposure to unfamiliar climates, languages, and customs. European slaves, particularly from areas prone to Viking raids or regional conflicts, were moved through Western markets such as Dublin, where the convergence of raiders, traders, and local authorities created hubs for the commodification of human life, and where the market dynamics often subjected individuals to competition, negotiation, and occasionally violent disputes among prospective buyers. Asian slaves, whether from Central Asia, Korea, or the Indian subcontinent, were similarly transported across long and perilous routes to serve in households, administrative centers, or the elite courts of empires such as Tang China, where their labor was integrated into the intricate systems of governance, commerce, and domestic service that defined courtly life. The mechanisms of capture, sale, and transfer along these routes were both formal and informal, involving contracts, ledgers, and bills of sale in some locations, while in others, the transactions were dictated by immediate circumstances. Raiding parties, or opportunistic middlemen who profited from human misfortune. Interfaces. For example, archaeological findings reveal recycled paper contracts documenting the sale of enslaved individuals, recording details such as origin, gender, and the names of buyers and sellers, providing tangible evidence of the structured yet morally fraught enterprise that undergirded Silk Road commerce. Meanwhile, in more ad hoc or emergent markets, the lack of documentation did not lessen the human cost, as captives endured harsh conditions, abuse, and the uncertainty of their futures, highlighting how the trade in people operated as both an economic system and a social institution, deeply woven into the networks of power, trade, and survival that defined the era. Beyond the immediate physical and logistical realities, the experience of slavery along the Silk Road carried profound cultural and psychological implications. Individuals were often separated from their families, communities, and native languages, forced to adapt to new social norms, customs, and religious expectations, while simultaneously coping with the daily demands of labor, obedience, and survival. In some cases, enslaved individuals managed to carve out niches of skill or influence, offering services that were valued by owners or courts, thereby creating a precarious form of social leverage. Yet these achievements were always shadowed by the fundamental lack of freedom and the constant threat of abuse or exploitation. The loss of identity, autonomy, and familial connection was profound, illustrating how the human dimension of trade extended far beyond the mere movement of goods, embedding experiences of suffering, resilience, and adaptation into the very flow of Silk Road commerce. Ultimately, the multifaceted pathways through which people became enslaved from warfare, poverty, voluntary submission under duress, or long-distance trade underscore the pervasive and enduring impact of slavery as both a human and economic institution along the Silk Road. These experiences reveal the tension between survival, exploitation, and agency, illuminating the ways in which commerce, conquest, and societal pressures intersected to create a network in which the movement of people was inseparable from the movement of commodities, ideas, and culture. The lives of these enslaved individuals, though often lost in the shadows of history, form an essential part of the story of the Silk Road, reminding us that the wealth, sophistication, and cultural richness of these trade networks were built not only upon silks, spices, and precious stones but also upon the enduring toil, resilience, and sacrifice of countless human beings whose stories demand recognition, understanding, and remembrance. The Silk Road, stretching across thousands of miles of deserts, mountains, and plains, has often been celebrated as a conduit for the exchange of goods, culture, and ideas. Yet beneath this narrative of connection and prosperity lay an intricate tapestry of human experiences marked by both extraordinary achievement and profound suffering. And the paradox of this ancient network is that alongside the flow of silks, spices, porcelain, and precious metals, it also became a channel for the trafficking of human lives, intertwining commerce with coercion in ways that shaped the trajectory of civilizations across Asia, Europe, and Africa, as caravans threaded through the Gobi Desert, crossed the Pamir Mountains, and navigated the Oasis and river valleys of Central Asia. Merchants, envoys, and travelers carried not only material goods but also religious doctrines, philosophical ideas, scientific knowledge, and technological innovations, facilitating a cross-pollination of thought that would influence societies for centuries. Yet the same roads bore witness to the capture, transport, and sale of individuals whose labor and suffering underpinned the very commerce that enabled such intellectual and cultural exchanges. Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and myriad local spiritual practices found their way along these routes, their teachings merging with indigenous beliefs, giving rise to syncretic philosophies and cultural practices that blended distant traditions into local contexts. And scholars, monks, and artisans acted as vectors for these ideas, traveling alongside goods in caravans, settlements, and market towns, exchanging knowledge through discourse, manuscripts, and the replication of artifacts, In the courts of Tang China, Abbasid Baghdad, or the cities of the Mediterranean, one could find a jade figurine from the east placed next to a glass vessel from the west, alongside texts on mathematics, astronomy, or medicine that had traveled hundreds of leagues, reflecting how material and intellectual wealth were entwined with trade networks that were often maintained through the labor of enslaved individuals. These human conduits, whether voluntarily or forcibly displaced, carried cultural practices, language, and skills that shaped their new environments, even as they endured the harsh realities of bondage, demonstrating how the Silk Road's facilitation of knowledge and innovation was inseparable from its darker dimensions of exploitation and coercion. Scientific knowledge, too, moved along these arteries of commerce, with innovations in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and engineering flowing across borders in ways that transform local capabilities and informed the development of empires. The transfer of papermaking from China to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe, the dissemination of gunpowder, the introduction of new agricultural techniques, and the circulation of navigational tools are all examples of how the movement of knowledge mirrored the movement of people and goods. Yet these advancements often relied on the unrecognized and unacknowledged labor of enslaved individuals, whose contributions, both direct and indirect, facilitated the infrastructure and networks necessary for such exchanges. In caravanserais, market towns, and port cities, enslaved laborers loaded and unloaded goods, maintained storage facilities, tended animals, and ensured that merchants could continue their journeys, providing the essential support without which the vibrant exchange of ideas, culture, and technology would have been impossible. The juxtaposition of intellectual flourishing and human suffering along the Silk Road illuminates the complex ethical and social dimensions of these trade networks, demonstrating that the spread of religion, philosophy, and science was not a process separate from the coercive labor that transported both commodities and people. As scholars translated texts from Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, Greek, and Chinese into local languages, these intellectual achievements were made possible in part by the relative stability and connectivity provided by the laboring populations who cleared paths, defended caravans, and maintained urban centers, highlighting how the material and human infrastructure of trade routes was inseparable from the cultural and scientific legacies they produced. Enslaved individuals, whether working in domestic service, agriculture, military functions, or artisanal production, were embedded into every level of these networks, their labor supporting the cities, temples, courts, and academies where ideas were created, debated, and preserved, and yet their voices, experiences, and contributions often remain absent from historical narratives, obscured by the grandeur of empires and the artifacts of trade. The Silk Road also facilitated the transfer of technology in tangible ways, from the movement of metallurgical techniques and irrigation practices to the circulation of textile production methods and medical knowledge, illustrating that the flow of ideas and practical skills was as continuous and vital as the flow of goods themselves. Caravans carried not only commodities and human labor but also instruments, manuscripts, and tools, enabling knowledge to reach distant regions and creating a web of interdependence among civilizations that spanned continents. This blending of material, intellectual, and human capital generated an unprecedented cross-cultural fertilization, yet it was inseparable from the exploitation of human beings, whose toil, suffering, and endurance created the logistical foundation for the mobility of ideas, much like the roads themselves, which required maintenance, security, and a human presence to remain functional over such vast distances, even as the Silk Road enabled the flourishing of art, literature, philosophy, and science. The realities of human suffering persisted alongside these achievements, a reminder that the pursuit of wealth, knowledge, and cultural exchange often relied on systems of coercion, inequality, and oppression. The juxtaposition of monumental intellectual progress with the trauma of forced displacement and labor challenges any simplistic celebration of the Silk Road, compelling us to recognize that human agency, resilience, and endurance existed within a framework of systemic exploitation, and that the transmission of culture and knowledge was inseparably linked to the experiences of those who, while perhaps silenced in historical texts, formed the backbone of the very networks that allowed civilizations to connect, evolve, and endure. Ultimately, the Silk Road's dual legacy of enlightenment and exploitation underscores the complex interplay between human ambition, intellectual curiosity, and economic imperatives, revealing that the spread of religions, philosophies, science, and technologies was inextricably bound to the movement and suffering of enslaved populations. To understand this network fully, one must view it not only as a rote of goods and ideas but also as a human ecosystem in which lives, labor, and knowledge intersected across time and space, illustrating the profound and often painful realities behind the cultural, technological, and religious legacies that continue to shape our world today. As we reach the close of our journey along the Silk Road, it becomes increasingly clear that this network of trade routes was far more than a mere corridor for silk, spices, and precious artifacts. It was a complex tapestry woven from the threads of culture, knowledge, ambition, and human suffering, a living testament to both the ingenuity and the darker impulses of civilizations that spanned Asia, Europe, and Africa. While the Silk Road allowed merchants, scholars, and travelers to exchange goods, ideas, and technologies, it also bore witness to the exploitation, displacement, and enslavement of countless individuals whose lives were intertwined with the fortunes and ambitions of empires and trading communities. The stories of those who were captured in war, sold by desperate families, or compelled into slavery under extreme conditions are reminders that behind every jade figurine, every bolt of silk, every finely crafted vessel, there were human beings whose toil, suffering, and resilience made these exchanges possible. These narratives, often omitted from grand historical accounts, demand our attention and empathy, for they reveal the true human cost of the wealth, cultural exchange, and connectivity that the Silk Road represents. In reflecting on the lives of enslaved individuals along these routes, one cannot ignore the vast geographic scope of their experiences, from the bustling markets of Shandong in eastern China to the arid expanses of Central Asia, and even as far west as Dublin, where human lives were bought and sold alongside goods brought by raiders, traders, and merchants. Each route, each caravan, each oasis became a stage on which the dramas of survival, resistance, and adaptation played out, illustrating the resilience of the human spirit even under circumstances of profound deprivation. The labor of these individuals, whether transporting goods, maintaining caravans, serving in households, or contributing to military campaigns, was instrumental in sustaining the flow of commerce and knowledge that defined the Silk Road. Yet it was accompanied by overwork, abuse, malnutrition, and the psychological toll of isolation, loss of identity, and separation from family and community. These lived experiences remind us that cultural and technological advancement often relied upon systems of coercion that were morally fraught and ethically complex. At the same time, the Silk Road stands as a remarkable conduit for the transmission of ideas, philosophies, religions, and innovations, a testament to the human capacity for curiosity, collaboration, and creativity. The same routes that carried enslaved individuals also carried Buddhist scriptures, Islamic philosophy, Christian texts, Zoroastrian beliefs, mathematical treatises, medical knowledge, and artistic techniques, shaping civilizations in ways that transcended borders and generations. Artisans, scholars, and merchants participated in this vast exchange, producing hybridized cultural expressions and technological advancements that would leave lasting legacies across continents. Yet, it is essential to recognize that these legacies were inseparable from the very human costs that enabled them. Knowledge, culture, and innovation were transported and disseminated not in isolation, but alongside the movement of enslaved people whose labor and sacrifices were often unrecorded, yet foundational to the functioning of trade networks, urban centers, and empires. The story of the Silk Road challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about the past. That globalization, connectivity, and wealth have always carried hidden costs, and that human suffering is often entwined with progress. It teaches us to look beyond the material and intellectual achievements to consider the lives of those who enabled them, whose resilience and endurance, though frequently uncelebrated, were instrumental in shaping the civilizations we study today. By acknowledging these histories, we gain a more nuanced understanding of how culture, commerce, and human agency intersected in ways that were both inspiring and tragic. As we reflect on this dual legacy, we are reminded that the Silk Road, much like globalization today, was neither purely benevolent nor entirely malevolent, but a complex system in which human ambition, ingenuity, and ethical compromise coexisted. The stories of those who were enslaved, exploited, or displaced compel us to consider the moral dimensions of commerce and cultural exchange, urging us to honor their experiences and ensure that their contributions are not forgotten. These lessons resonate not only in historical scholarship, but also in our contemporary understanding of trade, migration, and cross-cultural interaction, reminding us that behind every exchange, there are human lives, stories, and legacies that matter. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Silk Road and exploring both its marvels and its shadows. If you found this story eye-opening, informative, or thought-provoking, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so that you do not miss any of our future explorations into history's hidden narratives. Sharing this video with your friends and family also helps us spread awareness of the complex, often untold stories that shaped our world. Your support allows us to continue bringing you content that uncovers the human experiences behind the events and civilizations we often only see through the lens of commerce or conquest. With that, I wish you a peaceful evening and a restful night, carrying with you the reflections of the countless lives that journeyed along the Silk Road, their resilience and humanity echoing across time, reminding us to honor their stories and the lessons they offer for our shared future. Good night, and may your dreams be enriched by history, insight, and the enduring spirit of human courage.